Hello, everybody. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Left Hand to Leftist podcast. My name is Carlos. I am your host. I'm so excited to have you all here with me. We have a really insightful conversation today. Today, we'll be talking about data centers. I'm not sure where everybody is who's tuned in today, but I currently live in Maryland. And there has been a lot of conversation within the state of Maryland, but also nationally about data centers, what the benefits are, what the negatives are, how communities who have data centers are currently being affected, and also what are lawmakers and politicians doing to either disincentivize or incentivize data centers. So, you all, I'm really excited for this amazing conversation. And with that, let's get on to it with our first video. I want to start is actually a little background information on data centers. So an easy way to think about a data center is think about it as a giant storage facility that is used to house multiple servers and computers that process data 20. So as with any other piece of technology, it needs electricity to run. So you're talking about a huge storage facility that is constantly running and constantly needing electricity, not only to run the computers, but you also have, depending on what type of cooling system you can have a electrical cooling system which uses fans and other means to keep the computers cool. Because we all know, even when my computer and my setup in my podcast studio set up here, if I just leave my computer, my microphone, my webcam running 24/7, they're going to overheat and hopefully not burn my apartment down. But what happens is that with these cooling and ventilation systems, they are constantly running electricity, which is in turn draining from the grid. If you have a water based system, then it's not draining as much electricity, but in turn, it is draining water resources from the community. And as we know by our simple economics that we all learned in school, when there is an abundance of scarcity, there is also in turn higher prices that people are going to have to pay. So when you talk about electricity, which comes from the grid, and we know within this country we are severely under par when it comes to having the amount of renewable resources, having solar panels, having batteries to actually take all this renewable power to be able to contain it and disperse it out throughout the grid. We have weak infrastructure when it comes to grids, that we already have a scarcity when it comes to electrical power. So we're going to bring in something into our communities which are designed to basically suck out all of the electricity from the grid. On top of that, we're already seeing scarcity when it comes to water. You have on the West Coast, you have total communities that are issuing, I think the entire state of California already tells residents not to do things like water your grass, try to limit the amount of the time that you're taking showers, just because they already have massive droughts. And we see this when we even look at large bodies of water which whole communities used to use as their freshwater sources are actually dwindling down just because of the climate change that man has been contributing to for generations. So when you have a scarcity of water, and that's not just the West Coast, we also have it on the East Coast as well. We've had less rain than we've had for generations. We see that it's getting hotter, but it's not also getting colder at the same time. In the subsequent months, we have a reduction in things like snow. We see that there is overall a scarcity when it comes to fresh water within the country. So you're talking about having communities that already have to deal with not up to par renewable resources. So that means that we're already lacking when it comes to electricity, and we're lacking when it comes to water. That means when these data centers come to your community, what's going to happen is you are going to in turn have to pay for more resources to keep up with the amount of consumption that these data centers are taking. In turn, I want to key in on something that was mentioned not just by Donald Trump, but by the different committee members that were referenced within this video, is that you have on the GOP side, the common answer is yes, we should bolster up our fossil fuel emissions. We should bolster up, and it's even ironic, not even ironic, crazy enough for Donald Trump to say, oh, we need to bolster up clean coal. Now, I can tell you this. I have been living at currently all of 27 years. I have never seen clean coal. But so you're talking about the GOP strategy is, let's bring these data centers in. They're already going to drain our resources. But then on top of that, we're going to burn more fossil fuels and coal that are going to further pollute the climate, making the climate crisis even worse, making droughts even worse, making the strain on the electrical grid even worse, because at the same time we're not going to invest in renewable resources. So let's just make the whole thing worse. On the Democratic side, you have, yes, let's bolster up renewable resources, but at the same time, you do not hear Democrats calling for there to be a pause and evaluation when it comes to expanding data centers. So it's like you have both sides, which are kind of picking their battles, but they're mostly both on the same side of a really horrible, horrible coin, which is damaging the communities that you and I live in. So now that we kind of talked about the utility impacts and some of the environmental and climate impacts, I want to take a second to go to our first article here from the Times, talking about why data centers are actually backfiring on states, and also some of the repercussions that come from data centers when it comes to getting tax benefits from the state government to come into operation. So we have our article here. Again, it's from the Times. It's called Why Tax Breaks for Data Centers Could Backfire on States. And this is by Andrew Chow. So it states that as the AI boom continues to escalate, states have rushed to entice data centers with juicy tax breaks. Data centers not only provide cloud-based storage, but also the training of increasingly powerful AI models. Lawmakers in more than 30 states have carved out tax incentives for data center companies, arguing that without them, the data centers wouldn't come, and that their presence is essential toward providing growth and income tax revenue and driving economic development. Some economists and policy experts have started to question this logic. In a new study from Good Jobs First, a nonprofit research group, authors Greg Leroy and Cassia, unfortunately I cannot say her last name, find that data center tax breaks have swelled to billions of dollars in lost revenue for states a year, and that those losses for some states actually outweigh the tax revenue that data centers bring in. Quote, it's $1 billion subsidy to the industry that is dominated by a few big companies, says Cassia. Conversely, other economists and data center lobbyists argue that the industry's overall impact vastly outweigh those potential losses, including by supporting local infrastructure and catalyzing further investment. The paper's authors contend that even if there are positives, the public doesn't yet know the extent of their costs, which are often obscured by tax privacy laws, confidentiality agreements, and sheer lack of research. Quote, all politicians and corporations want to talk about the benefits while ignoring or downplaying the cost of development subsidies, Leroy writes in an email to the Times. Quote, let the companies compete on quality and price, not on how much they can extract from taxpayers to distort economic development and land use. So right off the bat, what we're seeing is there for some reason is a need for legislators and politicians to give us the runaround that they give every single time that they want to invest money into private corporations for their private profit. What they always say is, and this reminds me of a conversation I was actually having with a friend a few weeks ago about the Amazon H2 headquarters. What happened with the Amazon H2 headquarters, for those of you all who don't know, is that a few years ago, Amazon was looking at creating a second headquarters. So they basically went around pinning cities against each other, saying who's going to give us the highest amount of tax subsidies that we can get for, remember, a multi-billion-dollar company that by some statistics have said is the wealthiest company in the entire world, and which was owned by one of the wealthiest human beings in the world as well. So you had cities offering them multiple tax subsidies, different zoning regulations for them, and basically saying we will roll out the red carpet for you to be able to come to our city, competing for each other. And the logic that they gave to their constituents, the politicians did, was that if we do not give these concessions and these subsidies and these tax breaks to these businesses and corporations, that they would not come to our area and bring the quote unquote jobs and other things that these companies often promise and a lot of times do not deliver on. So How is that kind of linked in with the data centers is that we see that politicians are again are saying if we do not give these subsidies, then we will not get data centers in turn. I challenge that one because we know that these data centers are going to keep popping up in different communities, not because the community needs them, but because these tech companies need them to even grow themselves. We are seeing AI be expanded where even public school systems are looking into how they use AI. Every time you go on your phone, you are always asked about how much data a company can take from you and sell it as well. So we already know that these tech companies are collecting as much data as they can from us. They're collecting as much information, and AI is only growing and growing and growing. So we already know that these data centers have to go somewhere. So it is not incumbent on residents to give up their tax dollars to bring these data centers to their communities. And always we want to challenge whenever they say, oh, you have to give these tax subsidies to these companies because we're going to get the return on our investment tenfold. We see that has very, very, very rarely ever worked out unless it is for the politician's benefit. The politicians continue to use your tax dollars to invest in these companies, and they receive their return on investment a lot of time in the return of political campaign contributions. So we always have to remember if public dollars are going into it, then the public should receive the overwhelming benefit and return on their investment. So let's continue reading. It says up, up, and up. Many data center agreements are shrouded in secrecy, which means that the paper's authors had limited data to draw from. At least 12 states, Leroy says, share no data on tax expenditures for data centers at all. But by looking through state budgets and other fiscal reports, the paper's authors found that at least 10 states are missing out on $100 million per year in tax revenue. Much of this comes from subsidies from equipment like expensive servers, which needs to be swapped out every few years. Many of these exemptions are uncapped in terms of their dollar amount or time limit. This means that as data centers grow in size and power, so do subsidies, forcing states to drastically recalculate their budget projections. In Texas, the cost projection for its data center's sales tax exemption program increased from $157 million dollars in 2023 to $1 billion dollars this year. These hyperscalers come and spend lots of money, and the tax breaks are going up and up and up, says Cassia. Data center proponents offer several rebuttals. First, they argue that most states already offer tax exemptions for manufacturing equipment, and these new carve outs are simply bringing data center industry in line with those rules. They are also arguing that without subsidies, data center companies would set up shop elsewhere. In 2022, a tax incentive evaluation study from the Carl Vinson Institute of Government at the University of Georgia found that 90% of data center activity in Georgia was due to the incentive, implying that without these tax breaks, all of that business would essentially vanish. However, there is a debate in economic circles about around how much incentives actually cause economic activity. A 2018 paper from the economist Timothy Bardick found that the percentage of firms who made a location decision based on incentive was much lower than the Vinson number, between 2 and 25%. Quote, you need to allow for the fact that some incentives, you would have gotten some data center activity anyway, Bartik tells Time. Quote, my view is that there are potentially some fiscal benefits of data centers, but the industry is vastly overstating them, end quote. So as we can see here, um, it really already shows us what we said in the first part of the article. You have these corporations that are saying, in order for us to help your community, you need to buy into us. You need to give us money so that we are able to come help you. The problem with that theory is that they were going to come to your community regardless. Majority of these companies already know where they want to go. They know where they want to do business, and they know where they want to set up shop. Just because your community is offering them tax benefits, will that change their mind? It may be a percentage of them that change their mind just because they're saying, oh, we're getting more tax revenue from you. But let's be clear. their ulterior motive is not to help your community. Their overarching desire is not to provide economic development to you, your community, your neighbors, provide high paying jobs. Their main attraction is to extract as many resources as they can from the public and increase their profit as much as they can. So we have to keep that in mind anytime we hear a politician tell us how our tax dollars should go to a private industry instead of to ourselves. And one other thing I do want to mention in this is that it's tiring and also sickening to hear politicians continue to tell us, the actual tax-paying residents, that we do not have enough money to afford universal health care. We do not have enough money to make sure that every child going to a school has a breakfast and lunch provided to them. They tell us that as the wealthiest country in the world, we do not have enough money to make sure that we make public education free by making public college and universities tuition free. But they can turn around and in the same breath tell us that we have so much funds that we must invest money into a private corporation that has the power to, on their own private money into their own corporation. They do not need us to invest in them. They can do this on their own, especially when the profits are not being shared by the public. They're being kept private. So keep that in mind as we continue reading as well. A debate in Georgia. Data centers are a particular point of contention in Georgia, where they are growing at an unprecedented rate, particularly in the Atlanta metro area. State reports show that data centers incentives have waived at least $163 million in local, state, and sales tax collections each year since 2022. The governor's Office of Planning and Budget estimates those incentives will surpass $327 million next year. Last year, Georgia State Senate Finance Committee Chairman Chuck, unfortunately, I can't say his last name either, a Republican, spearheaded efforts to scrutinize tax breaks, resulting in the state legislature passing a bill halting tax breaks to data centers for 2 years. But Governor Brian Kemp vetoed it, saying it would harm investment plans. Chuck tells Times that the incentives are unnecessary. Quote, "The thing I've seen is that it's a competition of who can build it the quickest. It's more important to them that they are built first versus the cost," he says. Quote, "I'm not opposed to data centers, but if they're going to come, it shouldn't be on the backs of local people, and they should be paying all of their costs." Georgia State Senator Sally Harrell, a Democrat, agrees and contends that data centers do not provide long-term jobs or serve local businesses. Data centers typically employ just a few dozen workers, which pales in comparison to factories of similar sizes. Quote, "The local community is left footing the bill for big national companies that generate economic activity elsewhere," she writes in an email to Time. The aforementioned 2022 Vinson study in Georgia found that the amount of revenue foregone due to exemptions far exceed the tax revenue generated by data centers, resulting in a negative state fiscal impact of $18 million in 2021. The study argued, however, that because data centers would mostly not have been established without the incentive, their overall economic impact was significantly positive. Nathan Jensen, a professor at the University of Texas, argues that this line of reasoning is flawed. Quote, "It's always a bit of a trick where they cite the economic impact. You could go to a Walmart parking lot and throw $100 in the air, and that would have a net positive economic impact," he says. Quote, "The key is the fiscal impact. Does the state make money back?" So as we see here, and this is one thing that, look, from me, you're not going to hear me rah, rah, rah for bipartisanship. I think a lot of times we see people use the term bipartisanship to really just mean going along with with what corporate backed politicians say. This is one time I will actually say that it looks like bipartisanship is actually helpful. It is good to see that Republicans and Democrats, the ones who are not just bought off by their corporate donors, are actually looking at these data centers coming into communities and saying, if you're not going to benefit our residents, why would I give you the public tax dollars to just further take away from the actual community, not only in draining resources, but also not even providing high paying jobs outside of the construction of the data center and the construction jobs that could come from them, only really if they're unionized jobs. But past the construction, what you are looking at is mostly janitorial work to make sure that the building stays clean. You may have some people who are hired just to monitor the servers, but a lot of these jobs can be done remotely to just watch if anything happens. And then if something happens, you could see someone from another state fly out to that specific data center to handle any maintenance problem that is needed, or have someone who lives maybe the state over who can just drive over. These are not big economic development hubs. These are literally storage units with computers in them that are just resource draining. But as always, you will always have corporate politicians who hand over your hard earned tax money to these corporations. And again, all of this money we're talking about $327 million from the state of Georgia, which could go towards feeding people, which could go towards shelter for unhoused people, which could go towards a whole host of issues that their community needs. That money could even go to bolstering up the to bolstering up renewable resources and other infrastructure needs, to that at one point, if it becomes not such a drain on the local environment, where it can actually be used for something positive, where we actually could have data centers. But instead, they would rather take your tax dollars, invest them into a data center, and then watch as the community crumbles. And we even see that here, where the governor of Georgia, Brian Kemp, vetoed the legislation, talking about it would harm investment plans. What that really means is, my corporate donors have told me I need to deliver them your tax dollars, and no one is going to get in their way or stop it. So now I want to go to our next article by The Verge that really talks about how organizations are coming together to push back on these data centers and set some regulations, and push politicians who aren't corporate backed to start establishing regulations and making sure that the communities are the ones who are benefiting in the end, not these private companies. So let's go to our next article. So our next article is from The Verge. It is titled "Tech Companies, quote, Be on Alert. NAACP says with new guiding principles for data centers." The NAACP and grassroots groups have come together to craft demands for new data center projects, by Justine Colma. It says one of the top civil rights organizations in the U.S. is putting the tech industry on alert, issuing a call to action for communities to demand more accountability from companies building new data centers. Electricity demand is rising in the U.S. for the first time in nearly 2 decades, thanks in large part to massive data centers that are being built to support advancements in AI. Utilities and some tech companies are increasingly meeting that demand with fossil fuel that worsen air quality and exacerbate the climate crisis, prompting the NAACP to issue, quote, guiding principles to help local community members fight back. Quote, no community should be forced to sacrifice clean air, clean water, or safe homes so that corporations and billionaires can build energy-hungry facilities. The group said guiding principles that is shared exclusively with The Verge. The NAACP is already in this fight, challenging Elon Musk's XAI data center in Memphis, Tennessee. Now it's also rallying others across the U.S. to take a stand with the release of a, quote, unifying guide for groups opposing new data centers and fossil fuel infrastructure. It's a warning to the tech industry to expect more resistance and potential legal action if it does not heed their concerns. Quote, it allows for tech companies to be on alert. Aubrey Connor, director of the Center for Environmental and Climate Justice at the NAACP, tells The Verge. Quote, that if they do not meet our demands as it relates to the guiding principles, that if we move into other forms of advocacy, including filing litigation, that there shouldn't be any shock or question as to why we're doing that. I want to first give the NAACP its credit. I know that there is a lot of kind of feelings about these legacy civil rights groups. We see in I won't be shy about it. We've seen a lot of civil rights leaders from our past who had their time in the spotlight, who were really out there fighting for the people, who some of who have been corrupted by big money interests, by these corporations who have basically paid them off to turn their back on the people who they for years have said that they support. This is the NAACP actually standing with residents and standing with the working class, showing them that these corporations' personal profit should not be over the working class people who live in these communities. And it's really funny that you see Elon Musk fighting for data centers. The same Elon Musk who has said that there is way too much quote unquote government waste, that the government is giving too much money out to people. It needs to rein it in. Supporting these data centers, which I'm sure he is one of the first in line to say that his company needs government subsidies. And it's great to see organizations saying that we're going to try every tool in the toolbox, not just advocacy, not just protesting. We're going to look at also legal means to fight this as well. So let's continue on with the article. The framework calls for more transparency from companies building these data centers. Specifically, it says that they should disclose details on a facility's water and energy consumption, emissions, subsidies, and corporate ownership as soon as they propose a new project. Companies should continue sharing this data with local communities after the data center goes into operation, the group demands. Energy and water efficiency standards ought to be legally binding, along with any commitments that a company makes to mitigate the facility's impact on a region. That can be accomplished through community benefit agreements struck between companies, community groups, and regulatory agencies, for example. The NAACP is already developing templates for such agreement advocates can use in the future, Connor says. The documents also call for renewable energy as large data centers, quote, are deepening reliance on fossil fuels and straining fragile energy grids. Indeed, data centers are driving a boom in new gas pipelines and power plants in the southeastern U.S., according to a recent report. And burning more gas means creating more pollution. The XAI data center in Memphis is a test case for the NAACP's ability to wrest concessions from big tech companies. Nitrogen dioxide concentration levels have jumped by 79% in the area surrounding the data center since it started operating in 2024, according to research from the University of Tennessee, Knoxville, requested by Time magazine. Local utility officials reportedly signed NDAs surrounding the project. So we can see that the NAACP is continuing talking about some really good things, and we talked about before as far as water consumption, energy consumption. One thing I definitely agree with here is making sure that there's a public eye and actually daylight when it comes to knowing how much water these companies are using and how much electricity they are using. And I would also say that it should be known, what are they doing to mitigate these things? What are these data centers doing and these tech companies doing to give energy back to the grid and to lessen the amount of water that they use? And I would also say it should be noted to residents how they are personally being affected when they see an increase in their water bill or in their electricity bill, how much of that is being contributed to by these data centers, which are sucking up their resources. I would also like to say is, how can any of us say that these data centers are providing a benefit when you literally have the nitrogen dioxide concentration levels jumping by 79% in an area surrounding a data center? So you're talking about people not being able to breathe clean air. So now we're not just saying that these data centers are causing people to pay higher utility bills, noise, pollution, and draining money away from residents in the form of tax dollars. We're also saying that what they are doing is putting out harmful chemicals into the air and increasing the likelihood of residents near these data centers to get things like asthma and other respiratory issues. And I'm sure none of us would be surprised to learn that a lot of these data centers are being put into Black, brown, and low income communities, because the wealthier a community is, the wealthier and whiter a community is, we have seen there be a consensus around politicians that we do not want to disturb our wealthy white constituents. But if you are a Black and brown and low income constituent, oh, they will throw your whole community under the bus and label you a sacrifice zone, which we even have one here in Maryland in the form of Brandywine, which has a huge concentration of power plants and is a majority Black community as well. And not even a majority poor community either. So it doesn't matter if you're Black or brown and you are low income or middle income, they will still label your neighborhood a sacrifice zone. So let's continue here. The Southern Environmental Law Center, SELC, fired off a letter to XAI on behalf of the NAACP in June, threatening to sue the company for alleged violations against the Clean Air Act. Aerial imagery obtained by the SELC showed 35 gas turbines that XAI installed at the site, which the NAACP and local environmental groups allege were running without a proper permit. In July, the Shelby County Health Department ended up granting XAI a permit to run 15 gas turbines. Soon after, the SELC filed an appeal with the Memphis and Shelby County Air Pollution Control Board challenging the health department's decision. Neither XAI nor the Shelby County Health Department responded immediately to inquiries from The Verge. Connor declined to speak to, quote, the specifics of any conversation that may be happening with XAI because of ongoing litigation, but the NAACP has yet to formally file suit since giving the mandatory 60-day notice in June. Quote, I can say that at this point, we're hopeful that one way or another, we will ensure that the community's best interests and needs are taken into consideration, whether that means moving forward with the lawsuit or whether that means finding another solution, Connor tells The Verge. XAI is developing a second, even larger data center location near its first one in Memphis. The data center neighbors predominantly Black communities, including Boxtown, which faces cancer risks that are 4 times higher than the national average. The first data center's gas turbines add to existing pollution in the area from other industrial facilities, including a nearby gas plant, according to the NAACP. Many of the points and the guiding principles that the NAACP shared with ensuring that the communities most impacted by this kind of infrastructure and pollution are involved in the decision-making and leading solutions. The NAACP didn't create the framework on its own. Nearly a dozen of other groups contributed, including Memphis Community Against Pollution and the Nationwide Climate Justice Alliance. They held a 2-day meeting in Memphis in late August to craft the principles together, echoing the first National People of Color Environmental Leadership Summit held in 1991, in which delegates formed 17, quote, principles of environmental justice. We had the convening in Memphis to show unity with the community there, Connor says. Quote, these places that have been sacrifice zones for so long were no longer going to stand by and allow for a new emergence of industry to come into the same communities and add more pollution. And you can read the entire framework that they laid out here as well. So what did we say earlier? They are targeting sacrifice zones. They are targeting Black, brown, and low income communities to put these data centers in, feeling that even if the residents do raise hell about it, they come and show up to public hearings, they testify, they email, write, show up to their council members, their commissioners, their state senators, delegates, representatives, everyone who's ever been on the ballot. They believe that these communities are going to just be looked over, and the NAACP and these other groups are making sure that that doesn't happen. And another thing that I forgot to mention earlier on in the article is that we always talk about how there needs to be more government transparency. There needs to be more transparency from these utility companies who we've seen raise rates over time. How come you have it right here in the article? It says that local utility officials reportedly signed NDAs surrounding the project. How does that increase any type of transparency? How does that make the community feel better about a data center coming when it is stated that any impact that they have, the local utility officials have signed an NDA, so they can't even tell the public. Again, you have these companies, these private industries who need supersede those of the actual public. And that is why we have to make sure that we're holding our elected officials accountable to make sure that they are not putting these private corporations above the needs of their own resident. One thing that wasn't mentioned here that needs to be mentioned is there needs to be some profit sharing. If a data center is going to come to your community and profit off of your community, and not just once, they don't just profit off of your community by taking the resources from you all. They do not just profit from the community by getting all of these tax dollar subsidies. The only reason that these data centers are even in operation is because of the amount of data that is not just taken from people knowingly, but unknowingly as well, that these companies have made models to profit off of. The advancements in AI that have been used to take jobs away and automate a whole lot of jobs. That is all a combination of how these data centers came into fruition and how these tech companies are profit. If they can take money from us in these multiple ways, at a certain point, they're going to have to start giving over that profit back to the same people that they're taking advantage of. So, all in all, I want everyone to come away from this podcast realizing that these data centers and these private corporations and these politicians who tell you that we need to invest in private companies so that they can invest in us, and how there's enough resources and money to give to a private company for their own profit, but there is not enough to actually take care of the residents that they are elected to represent. We need to remember that those are not the people who we want serving us. Those are not the elected officials that we want to represent us. We want representatives who are going to fight for the working class. So please, next time your community is talking about a data center, please show up to your town hall, show up anywhere, and make your voice heard. But I will also say, is as we come up on this next election cycle and election season, look at your politicians. Look at their campaign finance. See who's getting money from these data center companies, and see who's taking money from corporations. Because let me tell you, if they take money from corporation, that's who they're serving, not you. Again, my name is Carlos. It's so great to have you here on the Left-Handed Leftist podcast. See you next time.